Welcome to IC Data People, and we're here with the founder and CEO of EventVestor, Anju Marempudi. Anju, welcome to IC Data People. We're thrilled to have you here to talk about not just the world that I think so many of us know and love in alternative data, but actually talking about fundamental data and how that's being used by asset managers and other folks in the financial services world. So I guess I'll kick it over to Omri to start off with a few questions here.
Andrew, my first question is, how did your background set you up to start EventVestor?
Thanks, Evan and Omri. Going to my background. Prior to EventVestor, I worked for about 10 years in the corporate world, and most of the time working with corporate data. I worked across many industries, many functional areas, finance data, marketing data, sales data, operational data, and many of those things. And one of the things in corporate world is when you create data and you make decisions using the data, it takes time to identify the impact of those decisions. And the big difference I see in finance, a corporation makes a decision public and you will see the impact immediately in most cases.
Anju, I know that you, given your corporate background, I know you looked at the investor relations world as well as the asset management context for your data. I guess I'm really curious. How did you validate demand for your data products before you launch them? You're constantly launching new products. I'm curious how you go through that process. What does it look like when you're talking to an asset manager, and how are you determining what to build next?
Good question, Evan. The first step is for me, based on my experience with the corporate data and working with various customers, hey, does it make sense? Is this the type of data that makes sense? So self validation is the first thing. Then in the very early days, before going to the hedge funds, we have done some internal research in terms of event studies, back testing to see what happens when the events are announced immediately, midterm and long term, and what happened prior to this event. That has been a good validator to see, hey, there is a good demand for this type of data. But the second validation before it became big with the quant world was when we worked with investor relations. Because obviously, most of the data is coming from public companies, and investor relations control what data is coming and how it is coming. And obviously, they wanted to know how market reacts to some of the announcements they are making, because that's important. And seeing both the sides of it gave the confidence to see that, hey, when the market is ready, this is the kind of events and data that could be used. And ultimately, once you start working with some of the large quant funds, started using this data, that gave you much more validation to see, hey, this prime time has come for this kind of data.
I love this. And one of the things I always think about after I look at the demand is actually the challenges coming up next. What do you think is the biggest challenge you faced when you're trying to productize and build your data set?
So the biggest challenges, obviously, when it comes to is, once you identify and come up with the data set that you have, to see how the customers are going to receive this data, how they are going to use it. But even before that, once we have an idea to build a data set around specific data sets, and knowing the quant side of it particularly, we see that we want to make sure whatever data set we create, we'll be able to create with point in time history. That is very critical when you are building any data sets for the quants or systematic use cases. I'm sure that's true even for discretionary, because you want to know exactly when something happened and including the time before market, after market. And you should be able to tie it back to an entity at that point in time. So unless the data gives you that capability, it will be very challenging to make sense of it later on. That has been one of the things. The other challenges is obviously once we know specific data set we want to build, and making sure that data is available consistently. Because maintaining that same data, because once customers build models, you want to make sure the data is available in a consistent manner and it's not changing often, because that will force them to keep changing the models. I think these are some of the major challenges, and I think so far I would like happy to say, EventVestor, I think we have been continuously adding new data sets, adding new markets, leveraging the knowledge we have built and the expertise we have built over time.
That is super interesting. And to dive even deeper on what you guys have built, is what would you say is the biggest and most powerful insight you've created from your data set?
Yeah, this is very interesting, Omri. Now that we have over 15 years of point in time history, over 100 different categories of events, kind of a 360-degree view of any public company. And all the companies listed in US, for example, for now. And as we go through this, there are two aspects I would like to highlight. One is the market regime changes. The kind of events during, for example, 2008 financial crisis or the 2020-21 COVID, what are the type of events companies are announcing? For example, it could be dividend suspensions, buyback suspensions, companies withdrawing guidance, and then how they are resuming back, and how the what is the variation across different companies by size, by industry, and how they affect. That was fascinating to see how consistently we've seen that in both these major regime changes, and we are happy that we have the data to cover both of them. But more importantly, I think what we notice is the regime change within a company from the IPO stage, how the events tell you the story even before what is going to come, and after that, what happened, how they raise capital, how they use the cash they have, what is their product life cycle, and when they start paying dividend, because each one is going to tell you a stage where the company has reached a certain stage. And you get that sense even before that happens. What type of guidance are they coming up with? What are the KPIs? How they are changing the KPIs? This to me is more fascinating, because with the events, with this history, you will be able to track the complete regime change within a company, then compare it with the peer group companies.
Yeah. So, Anju, you touched on a variety of ways that the asset managers you sell to might be using your data. I'm curious, one of the questions that I hear all the time from data users, data consumers, is how do I fit this into my existing model? How do I use this in concert with other data sets? Obviously, you've been operating in this market for quite a while and understand the use case of your clients probably as well as anybody. I'm curious, how are your clients using your data in concert with other data sets?
Good question, Evan, again. I think obviously, as hedge funds, you will know only to some extent how they're really going to use the data. But in general, we have seen that EventVestor data is used for generation all by itself, or in combination with other data. It could be strata market data, or it could be other alternative data. Because whatever you do, overlaying corporate events will give you better insight into what happened, whether you're just doing based on the market or incorporating other alternative data. That's one area where we have seen. And the second is in terms of risk management. In fact, we do have a data set on adverse events alone. Of course, you can use other events also for risk management, but our adverse events is very popular. And the third area probably customers are using is in terms of reconciling the market. How, when a stock reacts in a specific way, what are the events that happened? How is it with this company? How is it the peer group companies? And how can I reconcile the market reactions to a specific stock? Can the events validate some of this movement? I think that's another area where they're using. That's as far as the hedge fund customers are using. But we also see a good use case, and we started working with some in terms of even the alternative data vendors can leverage events data. Let's say, for example, alternative data vendor tracking credit card information, but knowing if the company has introduced a new products, they have launched into a new market, or they have changed their strategy, they changed their KPIs, knowing that on a regular basis will help them better estimate and better get insights from the data they are tracking, because they're only tracking for consumer response, but what company has done to generate that response is something events can provide insight. And that we have seen a one powerful thing.
This is great, Andrew. And before we wrap this up, I would like to know, what do you think is the biggest change that's going to happen in the next 5 years in the data world?
Well, the last 5 years, as we know, has been explosion of data, not just in finance, every area. And fortunately, it's not just the data explosion. The tools to analyze the data and generate insights have exploded. Of course, we all hear about ChatGPT over the last few months, and that's entering into investment area too. But I think the data is still going to continue to expand, explode over the next 5 years. The tools that leverage will also continue to increase in terms of their efficiency and capability. So the one outcome of that could be, we'll see more and more event-driven investment decision-making processes. Whether even if you are a discretionary, I think you will end up doing more quantitative research, quantitative insights before you make a discretionary. It's not like discretion is going to go away, but a lot of their insights will be coming from quantitative research and using this vast volumes of data that's being generated. Other challenge as the data explosion is for the data vendors, and now data vendors probably will go into thousands because everybody is generating data that could be used by from just looking to investment purposes. Now, how do they make sure they all tie this data, map this data to the entities and tickers, and providing with the point in time, and how investors can harness all these thousands of data sources in a meaningful way. I think that's the biggest challenge, probably from the investment perspective.
Thank you so much for joining us on IC Data People.
Thank you, Anju. It was great having you here.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Omri.